one start screen.
It's recording.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah, we wanted to have one start screen just to bring up the links. First thing.
All right.
Cool. Perfect. All right. Yeah. Hey, everybody. Thank you all for making the time to be here tonight. For those of you who have not been to any of our previous meetups, we're just putting the links up here. So there's a forum. On YouTube, you can find past recordings, and then on the meetup page, you can just kind of subscribe to get updates for the next events. I'm David. I'm a product manager. I've been a product manager for the past 6 years, and I'm joined by Juan in organizing this meetup.
Well, hi, I'm Juan. I'm founder of a company called Nolinga, and we with David we share our efforts in order to organize these shape up meetups in order to promote a new idea on how to develop and think software products, right? Just a quick notice. The idea is we have very small attendance today, not very, but small. So maybe we can allow the mix for the people and share the video, so we can have a more comfortable and more close gathering. But I will just I think it will be good for everyone the questions you have to post on the Q&A board, so people can vote them and check them previously about what the questions are. That's just a quick notice. And now let's intro Klaus.
Yeah. So I'm really excited, Klaus, that also you take the time today to share your experience. Klaus, you can say a few words about yourself maybe in a second, but yeah, Juan and I, we read your blog post about your experience. I think you're going to touch on the topic today, and we are super excited that you're going to take us really in depth on this today. So thank you, Klaus.
Totally. Thank you. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure. Yeah. Guten Tag. I'm Klaus. I'm from Germany. As you see outside, it's already dark. We have 8 p.m. here. As I said, I'm from Germany. I'm living in Berlin for 12 years. My professional career, I started with an agency. Its name was Buddy Brand. We were Germany's first Facebook agency back then. I even had to visit there back then to the Facebook headquarters in the One Hacker Way, and I wrote a book during this time. And why I am sharing this, it's back then, almost 12 years ago, when I first faced the question as a fresh CTO, fresh from the studies, how developers and designers in that case can work best together, building products for customers. I worked at my agency for 5 years. I was the CTO. I founded another startup afterwards where I was the CTO and the CPO. And yeah, since then, in the last couple of years, I call myself an independent CTO. So I have a small fund to invest in startups, and I have some independent software projects. But most of the time, I'm a CTO or tech lead because I prefer to work hands-on. I help teams and startups to grow, set up their architecture and engineering organization. And so naturally, I spend most of my time with engineers in engineering, but always building the bridge to the product side and also to the management side of the teams that I'm working on. Because I really feel without those bridges, you also cannot be a good engineering leader. So this is my background, just that you know, I have an engineering background, but my motivation is to build good products. Yes, today, roughly, I talk a little bit about the reasons why I am interested in Shape Up. Then I talk about a concrete project, about my current interim gig, how we solved the process in migrating from Scrum to ShapeUp. Then I talk a little bit about what was out of the cycle, like the shaping and the pitch. And in the end, I talk a little bit about how we collaborated in the cycle and the tools that we have used. And after the section for the process, for the shaping, and for the collaboration, there is time for questions. So if you have a specific question related to something that will come later, like tools or collaboration, please save it for this section, just that you know. Yeah, the reasons for ShapeUp, it's a little bit so Scrum State of the Union, and like this AI-generated picture of a Scrum in the real world, the current life of most software engineers with Scrum is a little bit messed up. And I could rant about hours for Scrum, and I already did in the past on other occasions, but I tried to have it brief here because I think most of you are already know what the downsides of Scrum are. But yeah, there are things, something that Andy Hunt from the Pragmatic Programmers once said on a conference: Agile now means we do half of Scrum poorly and use Jira. And yeah, this pretty nails it, because in a lot of Scrum setups we see today, every manager introduces its own flavor of Scrum and making it even worse. Everybody is using Jira. Somebody else, Alan Holub, he said, he was asked what I don't like about Scrum. Not much, he said, just the backlogs, the sprint, the daily Scrums, the sprint reviews, the POs, the Scrum Masters, commitments, accountability, standardization on an inflexible framework, and certifications. Yeah, just stuff like that. The rest is okay. This is something else from somebody out of my filter bubble. It's another CTO from Berlin, and he had the blog post saying why we always end up with waterfall. And basically he's saying there's a move to Scrum sometimes because you want to fight against the waterfall. But once you have Scrum, then you often have the situation that you don't have a real product owner, but you have external stakeholders to manage. And those stakeholders, they want predictability and they want roadmaps. This together with business pressure is leading to the need to efficiency. Efficiency then causes everybody is working on his own. Then you end up with different development and product organizations. And then you have, again, a situation of waterfalls, but you call it Scrum Fall then. And yeah, then at the end, the product is 2 sprints ahead, design is 1 sprint ahead, and developers are 1 sprint behind. And then you also are not where you really wanted to be at the beginning. And ShapeUp for us, for me, brought a really good paradigm shift. And one important observation I had here is, if you look at the shaped pitch and compare it with the other stages afterwards and before, you see that the shaped pitch doesn't change its shape once you have started working on it. And this is a really new paradigm, because in Scrum, the shape pitch maybe also don't change the shape afterwards, but ShapeUp brings enough flexibility before you actually working on it and involving everybody relevant to the topic of the pitch, that you can shape it before you have poured too much concrete. And this was what really struck with me, why I wanted to use ShapeUp. I read about it when the book came out, 2019, but I have not tried it out before this year. But I was following Basecamp since forever, I think. I was using Ruby on Rails in 2010, very early on. So I was almost always interested what comes out of this company, because I liked that they challenged stuff. And so I thought, yeah, give it a shot. Now we are coming to the first real part here, the process that we have adopted in this project. Maybe a few words about the project. The product is called Hydro Pocket, and it's an intuitive, simple, cloud-based application that allows plant owners and operators of hydropower plants to monitor, analyze, and optimize their stations. It's a progressive web app, and in the background, there are a lot of microservices, but they are out of the scope of our product. They are operated by the company offering HydroPocket called Void. But just that you know, we are developing just a progressive web app. We do not develop the whole ecosystem. It's in the industrial Internet of Things space. We have 4 software engineers on the project, 2 UX designers, 2 UI designers, 1 PO, also with other obligations. And before we tried it out, we're working together for roughly about a year in this exact constellation without a lot of changes. And normally the PO just decides the focus of the next couple of sprints. This is the normal working mode we had before. And basically everybody was optimizing towards the engineers. So the engineers were organized in the Scrum, and the designers, UX and UI, they were organized outside of the Scrum. And basically they were just preparing everything that is ready when the developers needing it. This is not an unusual pattern to work in Scrum. There are also other possibilities for sure that you include the designers inside the Scrum team as well, but this is not so often practiced, and it often goes against the traditional profession organizations inside of the company. So I saw a lot of different setups in the last couple of years, but the interesting thing is most of them tend to separate designers and developers. Yeah, and then if you work like this, you end up with a lot of context switches. You have a lot of mini waterfalls everywhere because developers need to give sparring to the designers for the next topics, even before they need to develop them, and vice versa. And the PO is all the time involved in everything at the end. So we did an experiment. I called it dual track, shape up and Scrum. It had nothing to do with the dual track Scrum that's out there. But basically we decided to keep Scrum because we do not want to worry any stakeholders or any management. And so we decided just in the summer, there are not that many people on the project. So those people that are available, they should try out Shape Up. So while there is no real harm, and when the others are coming back, they can just pick up with a normal Scrum process where they left. And so we did one cycle for 8 weeks and one cycle for 6 weeks. Our Shape Up working mode was, we had a fixed team. It was 4 people in our case, UX and UI, and 2 full stack developers, and no planned vacations for this team. Traditionally in this setup, UX and UI designers are used to working very closely together. So we decided to keep it like this and try it out inside of the cycle. The project, as before, was defined in advance by the PO. So we do not do any betting. But in the case for a Scrum team, I don't think that at the beginning there are the hugest gains. This team working in the Shape Up mode, they had no other Scrum obligations except to show the intermediate status at the joint Scrum review. So we kept the Scrum review and they were just showing what they had together to the other stakeholders and the rest of the team. Excuse me. The shaping was driven by UX because this profession has the most relevant conceptual and strategic skills to actually drive a pitch forward. Because the PO, he also had other management obligations inside of the company. So he had the factual knowledge about the hydropower plants, but he don't have the time to actually work on the pitch. So he was mainly sparings partner in our case. And where ended we up? So at the end, we had a little different picture. I called it at the end R&D mode. So it was like a research and development mode, like in the early days of a startup, everybody relevant working together on one topic and tries to finish it. We had everybody we need for decisions, like we had UX and UI and development. So these are development, UI I call builders, and UX I call shapers. But it was not that UX, the shaper, had time during the cycle at the beginning, at the first tries we had with this team to really work on the next pitches. They were very involved and we did a lot of decisions during the cycle. But at the end, the question, did we deliver something better, could clearly answer with yes. We did a lot of decisions during the cycle that should be gone into the shaping, but at the end, it led to a better product and not communicating with each other, if we are honest. It was not a perfect shape up, but we deliver something better. Did we deliver it faster? Yes, in an absolute time frame, definitely, because we had not this cascade for the different professions at the beginning. And I think one of the most important questions is, did we enjoy it more? And here I'm allowed to show something from the retro. So UI feedback did not disturb like normal in the Scrum. When you are already on the next topic and you need to fix something from the ticket before, UI feedback was very disturbing, but now it was really helpful. Now the developers craved for feedback from the designer, how they could polish it while they are still in the scope of the ticket. Somebody said they're feeling closer to each other. XD, it's experience design. It's a term for UX and UI. They have a joint team and development. Somebody said the teamwork feeling is back, and this was really a good comment for me, because this particular person felt a little bit left alone in the Scrum time before. And yeah, everybody working on the same topic, on the same page, in the right mindset, and everybody contributing to find the best solution, not only UX. So we had a lot of good ideas for sure from the developers. And what I also like to show here is the Agile Manifesto. And even if we did not a perfect shape up, the motivation to do shape up was enough to concentrate on the main topics from the Agile Manifesto. So we had individuals and interactions, like in this autonomous team working at one thing. We had working software all the time. We had a close customer collaboration. So if you, we really showed it customers before it was finished, and then could change something, and yeah, responding to change. And now the team decides its future process after everyone has gathered experience with this method. And this is really a good thing that we let them try it out. And now we suddenly have a lot of advocates, evangelists for this topic, because everybody enjoyed it and everybody saw the upsides. While framing it as an experiment, there was no harm for everybody else. One of the first learnings I want to give you here, in our case for baseline or the reactive work, probably Kanban would be a better fit than Scrum, because if the Scrum team is smaller, then you really profit from the ceremonies that much. But now, after this first phase of transition, where we were not able to implement ShapeUp by the book because of some reasons, because of some dynamics, sometimes some of the participants were not reading the book, but they were willing to participate. I made some thoughts in general about the process part of ShapeUp and tried to identify some patterns how to scale it. It's important to introduce here the concept of framing, like Ryan did, I think, this year in a couple of talks and also on his blog. So the important concept that we're missing in our case was framing. And it's about defining the objective or the problem before shaping and find out if the business wants to work on the problem. And this should directly feed into the shaping phase. Ryan framed it like, if we could shape this into something doable and execute it within X weeks, would that be valuable to us? So this question was never answered in our case. And if you introduce this into the ShapeUp puzzle, you have a whole new step you need to do. This is how I imagine ShapeUp could be scaled by the book. If we have like a organization-wide ShapeUp thing and not just transitioning one Scrum team. So I think you have like some shaping track here where you have somebody from product and UX and somebody from development doing the shaping work, like product and UX shaping, framing, developers for technical shaping, spiking, like doing specific spikes to find something out, if this is working with our data, if building prototypes and so on, and some sparing to the shapers. Then I think you have teams of developers and UI designers, most likely, that are doing the actual building work. And this here is not relating to one developer and one UI, it's just about the profession, because I think the team setup is very individual also for most of the cases. And then you have probably a couple of building teams in parallel, while you also have a team for the baseline and reactive work that frees up the rest of the developers and designers to actually build something, and they take care of reactive and preventive work, customer onboarding and support. And then you have this cooldown phase. I tried to be more specific than cooldown. What will actually be done in this phase is polishing, bug fixes, architecture. And this is how I understood ShapeUp can be scaled, like from the book. And now I tried to think of what are patterns for a Scrum team to scale it, because normally a Scrum team is a little bit smaller than if you want to implement ShapeUp for a whole organization. But on the other hand, you have also you have not that many resources, and you have a strict set of rules, and you somehow need to replace it in the expectations of all the stakeholders. This is my Scrum team migration pattern A. I call it flip-flop shaping outside of the cycles. So let's say you have a team of 8, like in our case, then you always can have some half of the team building something, and while the other half is doing shaping, framing work. Framing should also be here. And the technical part here can do all the customer onboarding and support and bug fixes. This is maybe a good pattern for teams where you don't have a separate operations team and you need to do everything within your team, but you want to free up at least half of the team to do some proper feature work. And you have a joint phase here, and then you basically switch sides, and then the others are building something. This could go hand in hand if it makes sense. So the guys shaping and framing it should, or a large part of them could then be the same than implementing it. I think it does not necessarily need to be the exact same setup, because this would remove flexibility out of here. And I think you need to mix and match the team all the time as you like. This is another pattern I think could work in our setup. Here you have a phase where you have two teams, like both half of the team working on in the shape up cycle, but then you need more time in between to do the shaping. I think you could do some framing while sparring with the building team if you are from UX and product, but you really need more time for shaping than the normal 2 weeks. Maybe it's even 6 weeks in between, but yeah, there need to be more exchange for them. And the problem here is in this setup that customer onboarding and support a little bit in between everybody. So it's dependent on the team setup and on your situation, because there could be situations where it's okay to not customer onboarding for 6 weeks. If you're in the very early phases maybe of your product and you just need a fast-paced method to build a lot in a concentrated way, then this could work. Or the developers need to take turns being on call, meaning for developers, one for a week is on call for customer onboarding and support. Could also work. We heard it from another remote meetup practitioner that he had a bug fixing Monday, I think. So you need to talk about how you want to tackle this if you prefer this. I think at the end, this method has more throughput, while the other method has more stability, like if you are in a phase where you already have customers. But the bottom line, it's the last slide of my process part, is ShapeUp is flexible and it's possible to start with a rather vague pitch as long as the team is staffed accordingly, but it just doesn't scale well. So pitch altitude really matters, because if you don't have the pitch altitude right, you cannot free up the shapers to work on the next thing in parallel. And now we have time for questions.
Perfect. I was going to let the questions begin. Okay, here we have one from David. David, I will allow you to talk. Are you there, David? If not, I can ask. Okay, maybe David is not here, but I will ask it anyway. It looks like there was little interaction from the PM during the ShapeUp experience, just UI UX development. Did this cause any vacuums or gaps during production where questions and issues had to involve a PM, or was the pitch clear enough to allow complete independence?
No, the pitch was not clear enough. Definitely not. This was one of our biggest learning curves. But I will cover what exactly went wrong with the pitch and why it's important in the next part.
Okay, perfect. I have some questions here that I wrote. Somehow the webinar tool doesn't allow me to write questions myself. That isn't good. But okay, what did you struggle personally with Scrum that made you try ShapeUp?
I was just annoyed about the inefficiencies. So you sit in a meeting, like we call them refinement meetings, where we went with the whole team, all 8 people, over all tickets, what needs to be built next. And then everybody is talking about it, having questions about it, arguing things that may not even that important, But yeah, so this is seeing this inefficiency all the time, week after week, and this whole bureaucracy, it really annoyed me. And this is where I saw the really great part of ShapeUp, that you have really a smaller group working closer together on the same topic. This was my personal motivation.
And following that questions, the question, why many executives coming from the, do you think why many executives coming from the tech side, do you think they still embrace Scrum, or they, and do they just want to let it, let it go out, right? Just don't try new things. What made you think that's happening?
I'm not sure that I get the question right.
Sorry, I think there's from the tech side one thing that we embrace Scrum and we don't want to let it go. So, why do you find this is happening?
So in our case, the real tech people, so the engineers, they were very open, because they often faced situations where it was hard to decide for all four how to tackle a problem, because some of the developers prefer to work bottom up, while others prefer to work abstract. So have to first the highest abstraction and then work your way down. So you have different styles of working, and I think it's really hard to align those styles of working in a joint meeting. But it's a lot easier if you have just two people that need to align.
Perfect. Here's another question by Ilon. Ilon, you're in.
Oh yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. So I was wondering if you could please elaborate on what you mean when you said ShapeUp doesn't scale well, and if you have any examples where you've experienced or seen what might cause that issue.
I just wanted to say it does not scale well if you do it like we did it in the first try. So if you need the shapers a lot inside the cycle, then it doesn't scale well. My message was that you need to free up the shapers by having the pitch on the right altitude. But it works anyway if you have them there, so you don't produce a bad product. So I think we really had a good solution at the end, but it just does not scale if you need the people responsible for shaping all the time inside of the cycle. But it can scale if you do this. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
Just adding to that, that's one of the things that on the last meetup, Chris talk about, that they introduce a product engineering in order to free the spike. Idea. I was going to ask another question. You say that the pitch and shaping was in charge of a UX person, right? The UX professional. Do you consider a developer to lead that, and why didn't you consider that?
Maybe it's the migration from the traditional way, because normally the UX is coming up with everything. And in our very, very first cycle, even the working mode inside of the cycle was like this. So the developers were asking the UX person what to do specifically, because UX previously wrote the tickets. So it was just this old pattern that they introduced at the beginning of the working inside of the cycle. But even in this scenario, just having the smaller group working together and having a faster feedback on the same thing was very beneficial. So even if we did not get it right from the beginning, we profited a lot from it. And yeah, basically it's legacy. So UX is writing the tickets, but in the second cycle, I think the developers were were a lot more proactive, so to say, and having also learned from the first cycle. And it was also different developers, maybe also different kind of people that liked to be proactive, coming with a technical solution and then forcing the interface on it, so to say.
And here David has another question.
Thank you. Hey guys, so and I've read the book and I've read other articles about this. Is it, in your experience, Klaus, did you ensure that all team members were fully dedicated at one project at a time, or the project that you experimented on? And the reason why I ask is part of my responsibility is also resourcing and resource forecasting. So if I've got, multiple initiatives or projects, and I know my, you call it your experience design team, if they're only going to be needed for, smaller items that might take 50% of their time, I know Shape Up was very strict on ensuring that the team collaborates together until the end of that cycle. But in your experience, was there some flexibility in moving people around, or in the event of an urgent matter, or just another parallel project? So for the developers, it was very strict. They really had no obligations besides the joint Scrum review once a week, and we also had a developer meeting in the other week. So we had one meeting for the developers. For the designers, it was not that strict. But in our case, it's a very technical product. They were not needed all the time. So it was possible that they have other obligations. So there were testing tickets in the Scrum process as well that they have started. So they had a little bit more slack. I think they would have been preferred personally, and to be also full-time on this, but it was not. But it was not crucial for the success. Okay. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I have another question. Just to unpack the word. You say, did we deliver better? What was better in that context? On what did you mean better in that way?
As I said, in the middle of the cycle, we showed it a real customer, and then we decided to not build the 3 initial main features we had in mind, but just do 2 of them, but to do them better. So we had user feedback on a real thing, on our real product in our application with our design and with the data of the customer and everything. So he saw this and we gave them a task, and we really had some valuable insights together as a whole team, the builders and the shapers, and then we discussed it. So this is what I meant with the R&D mode. So we are like a startup in the early days. Everybody is just working very pragmatically together. And so this is why I think we delivered something better than just UX is finishing the UX work, then UI is doing the 30 Figma screens, and then developers developing it and doing the trade-offs.
Okay, but just to consider, did the outcome of the project was better, or just to deliver the output from the development perspective and the UX perspective?
No, it's definitely the whole team thinks that the outcome is better, that we delivered a better product through this approach.
Got it.
Klaus, if I can also get a question into you. Did I understand you correctly, or am I assuming correctly that you shipped at the end of the cycle and that was the only release that you had? And how did that differ with before having kind of continuous releases? I'm assuming that you had, where stakeholders kind of turned off by this.
I talk about this in the collaboration part, I think, but the quick answer is we have continuous integration in place, but we did just releasing after after the end of each cycle. ShapeUp was integrating also, so we actually in the first cycle we had a feature branch, so we were merging it in at the end after we were done with the cycle, and this was an internal tool. And the other ShapeUp cycle we integrated all the time together with some feature guards. So the code was integrated, but it was not visible for all of the customers.
And did that sequence of shipping new stuff differ to what you had before? I think that was kind of the question I had, and was there some friction around that?
In our case, not, because we're not with 4 developers. We're not a super large team in this case, and so we had not a super high pace. So nobody was expecting something after a couple of days anyway. We were deploying every 2 weeks, but the communication for the customers was much less frequent. So an update with a new release for them, for new features, it happened like 3, 4, 5 times a year anyway. So this really does not change a lot in this direction. So it was no friction, no.
Well, thank you.
I have one more question here, so and then we can proceed. Sir.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, yes.
Hello. As I wrote there, I have the impression that implementing this can be a little bit tricky. Having 6-week cycles, it looks like a lot, especially for small and mid companies. If you release software every 2 weeks, you have like 26 release cycles in the year. And if you switch to ShapeUp, you have less than 8. How do you fight with that? Trying to gain adoption, or what's the strategy there?
I had this argument in the context of another team. The thing is, you are not, your frequency goes down. Yes, you're just releasing every 6 or 8 weeks. But on this 6 to 8 weeks, you're releasing more at once. So at the end of the year, you're probably more productive, but just you have a slower frequency, but you have a higher throughput. So this is my main argument for this situation.
Thank you.
Just to add a little bit to that, in my experience, I think the number of weeks for the cycle can be flexible. At first, I was a small company and I wanted to have more throughput for small things, and we did 3-week cycle +1 for cooldown. I think ShapeUp, it isn't strict about that time frame. Yeah,
it depends also on the size of the feature you want to develop. Exactly. For us, it was a larger feature.
Okay, let's go on.
Okay. So now we're talking about the shaping and the pitch phase. This is a mural board. In our case, for shaping, we invited everybody that was supposed to build it. So UX designer leading it, preparing the board. UI designer was part of it, the PO, and the 2 developers. And basically, UX was preparing the strategic context. So who is our target group? It's on purpose that I don't zoom in here because I don't want to share too much details, but UX was preparing the strategic context, the target group, what problem are we solving, and so on. UX was also coming with a couple of ideas already. So UX came with 10 ideas, and we evaluated those ideas, and then we remixed them. So we mixed and matched them and did some scribbles on the wall. And so far, so good. We did this in the real world, having a meeting together. But then afterwards, it was a little bit unclear how to proceed. So UX did, and this is a problem. This is not a good thing, in my opinion. And we already talked about it in the team. So UX created wireframes, because this is what UX is doing all the time. It finds solutions to problems. So UX was creating wireframes. And then we tried to find out after having the wireframes afterwards, we tried to find out the scope, what we want to do. And so we had identified some high-level areas, like 6 different high-level areas. And then we had some must-have, nice-to-have, won't need, different stages of how interesting it is and don't do. And then we sorted it like this, and we had a lot of questions all the time, because you need, in theory, you need one of the things we have here, but those are the core features, and it does not really, this was not the right altitude. So this is not a good practice. And in our shaping, we had, what we did right was that we had the strategic context, that we did ideation together. What we did not right, in my opinion, was creating the wireframes. And inside of the cycle, we basically finished our shaping in this cycle. So we had the user feedback inside the cycle. We had experiments with real data inside of the cycle, and we also had our first prototypes inside the cycle. So in the end, we found all the shaping answers and shipped something meaningful, but some of them we just cleared out as late as during the cycle. And this is really a learning I want to share here. If you migrate from Scrum to ShapeUp, don't underestimate the level of technical shaping and real data code-based experiments that are needed for proper shaping. Not just doing assumptions, you really need to do your prototype, and you really need to look at real data from real customers. But yeah, we had this situation with this shaping. We did not really know how to proceed. So we tried to create a pitch out of it, of what we had, because we clearly saw wireframes were not the right way. On the other hand, we had some time pressure. We wanted to finish it at a certain point that we can start the cycle, which is also something that I would not recommend if you don't have a very urgent project, because it was really an artificial deadline we were optimizing towards. So there were no harm done if we would have started 1 week later with a better pitch. But in the pitch, we copied things from the mural board. We had the strategic context, and we stated our appetite. So far, so good. We had a high-level thing. I would not call it breadboarding, but what are the high-level parts? And then, because we did not know better, where we divided it into a section called core features and close to core. So we were a little bit afraid of doing too much decisions, because we wanted to allow the team to build. So the PO was really flexible. So the PO was, I think, the biggest supporter of this idea of working with ShapeUp. So he said, I trust you guys. You have 6 weeks, you build something that solves these problems we have here. You just do it. So, and you have all the flexibility. And if you have just one thing out of here, it would already be helpful. So this was an easy mindset to try out ShapeUp. But on the other hand, it does not help with writing the pitch. We had here some real wireframes from our product, real screenshots from our product here and here. And then we had some examples from something really different. So we said, yeah, it should be going into this direction. And this is from another product or something somebody did UX found during research. It should roughly be like this. And here are some calculations to be done. And here, yeah, actually, this is a screenshot of real data we pulled, but it was not that we used this data to calculate this thing up here. So we did no real prototypes. We really underestimated the level of technical shaping that was necessary. So it was a little bit of this and that. We stated some nice to haves. We found some rabbit holes, but we could have been better if we really thought it through. And we also said what we won't do. We lacked fat marker sketches, we lacked breadboarding, and some real prototypes. So the summary of the pitch is that proper shaping includes technical shaping. You really need to drive technical decisions. You really have all questions answered. It needs to be backed by real data and calculations. Have some prototypes in your code base. Have the user feedback on these prototypes before you really start building it. And don't have wireframes. Even better would have been breadboarding. Yeah, so pitch altitude really matters. The interesting thing is too much as well as too less detail early on creates pressure, because the wireframes were creating pressure to the developers because they were assuming a lot of details, like what filters you can do and so on, like a lot of small things that could cause a lot of work for developers, but also having it not shaped perfectly also creates pressure, because as a developer, you then don't know what is expected from me. Is it the core features? Is it also the close to core features we had? So yeah, both cases can really create pressure for the team. A good pitch needs to be developed collaboratively. And the most important thing really is to free up the UX designer to already prepare the next cycle. I think Ryan shared a couple of days ago that the shaping basically is the uphill work and building is the downhill work. So I think a good point of where UX designer can hand it off in the future is when there are no open questions. So if really everything is clear what needs to be implemented. This also allows builders better to work on their own. I identified some points where the builders had some problems, and I think that was caused of having not the right pitch, because basically in the pitch was changing the shape. And also if the pitch is on the right altitude, CPO is not needed for sparing and could really build up the business part more and working more on the meta level. Yeah, this was my shaping and pitch section. So now we have time for some questions.
David, do you have a question?
I did, but I would queue it for a second.
Okay, no problem. I wrote to when you say the level of latitude, I think it's I will continue a question with that is how do you decide the level, the latitude level for the team, right? It's very hard to say that. And what would be better to err on the more side or to err on the less side?
That's a good question. So on the one hand, the pitch should be matching the people working on it. So in our case, where we had UX in the cycle to answer the open questions, it was okay to err on the less side because we built something meaningful. But I think normally it's probably a little bit better if you err on the more side, as long as you do not do wireframes or do something else. It's my take on this, because then if you err on the more side, if you have too much. It's also easier, I think, for the builders to organize themselves independently from a UX designer. But the best thing is if you find the right point, if you basically have no open questions. So, and with breadboarding and fat marker sketches, if it then makes sense and you really can say how to calculate what parts, then I think this would be a good level. Yeah.
I think from my side, the question was the example you gave for, or the learning you shared for technical prototyping, doing the calculations beforehand, and working with real data. Was that just particular to the first cycle, or was that a learning you then apply to the second? Like, what I'm thinking is, does this really always apply, or do you just need to develop an eye for these things? Like, oh, this sounds like something where we really should, de-risk this part first.
In our case, I think it was for both cycles. So both parts of the team had the same learning experience, so to say. It was a little bit differently in each of them, but yeah. They started in some parts over-specified and some parts under-specified. Then they built something, showed it to the customer, and had a good product at the end. But yeah, if you want to scale it, you really need to find this point. Did this answer your question? I think there was a second part.
No, it does. The question was
Okay.
mainly around, was it like a one-time thing, or is it really this repetitive thing that you need to put into your process?
Yeah, it really needs to be part of the process, I think, at least in our project, because if you don't answer these questions, and if you have not somebody that have tried something out beforehand with real code, real data, I think you cannot really answer the questions. And if you do this, I think a lot of new questions will surface just from your first prototype that also are questions for the other designers, UX and UI alike.
Thank you.
Okay,
Juan, did you want to cut in?
Yeah, I just have one more is how much was the involvement of a developer, of a technical expert in the shaping process and helping the UX person?
In the workshop, we were all equal, so everybody was participating. Developers were also scribbling and providing their ideas, and they were meaningful in the same way, because we have a very technical product, so to say. So we had some inspiration from developer tools were helpful, like some debugging in an IDE or something like this was a good thing to show to the other part of the team, something that the designers not necessarily have contact with. So it was good to have everybody in this brainstorming phase of the shaping. This, I would say, was a good thing. But then, yeah, you really need to, when you form the pitch, it needs to be on a better altitude.
Perfect. Does anyone have any question? Here, no open question here on the board. So if not, we can continue.
I mean, I would have one last to you, because I just, and then if others have questions, of course, otherwise I'll let you continue. But I think the teams that I worked with ShapeUp, what we struggled usually with was what I think you called a core feature and close to core, or kind of defining, we used to call this the meat and bones. So, we said this is bones, like this has to be included, and this is meat that we can put on top here and there. And still kind of developers always ask for more clarity on, okay, where can I actually cut and where can I not cut? And so this flexible scope, fixed time flexible scope was really something we struggled with. What was your experience there?
Fixed time variable scope was one of my main arguments to calm down the developers. Because as I said, the PO was very much on board, but the developers always in my team, in my experience, wanted to do more and do their best. So they were really afraid that it's unclear what's the expectations on them. So it helps them to pull them down, repeat it over and over. We had a couple of discussions on this topic. It's not a bad thing if we do not ship anything at the end of the cycle. It's just that we discovered something new. So far, this was clear for us that you can discover something new during the sprint, that why something is not working, and then you could change it accordingly.
Yeah, got it. Thank you.
Great. Let's continue.
Okay, then let's continue with collaboration and tools, but it's not so complicated in this AI-generated picture. I start with tools because I think it has it's a less interesting part here. We actually use Jira. I don't know if this maybe surprises somebody. So we had two boards. We had one board for the team itself. It was just a Kanban board with to-do, work in progress, and done. We had swim lanes for the epics, and we had also an unscoped epic. And then we had another board. It was then the epic level. So we had the epics on a separate board, and this I organized with an uphill and a downhill column to roughly represent the hill chart from Basecamp that we had not. So it was still the old project, so the same project and with the Scrum team, but just two boards that were limited to certain epics. So it was our view of the project, and we did not see the rest of the epics, and our epics were not included in the sprint and in the other planning. And yeah, so yeah, we were moving them then around in our daily and creating them, assigning them. So my learning on the tool side, don't blame the tool. Jira and Confluence can work. Process and communication is the hard part. So it's not a perfect tool. It's really a little bit clumsy. If you want to just create a task, then you need to fill in the epic and maybe assign it to somebody. So it's not the best tool. But if you free it up a little bit from your bureaucratic process, just using as a Kanban board like Trello, it's okay. So I would not mind thinking too much about the tool. Yeah, then the part where the builders organize themselves. The builders had no Scrum applications, as I already said, except for the review. They were doing mostly asynchronous work. We're using Slack on the side, and if somebody created something to test, like a prototype that's deployed on staging, he or she was sharing it immediately. And if the designer has finished one part in Figma, she was sharing it. And then we had basically an extended daily. It was 30 to 90 minutes sometimes, most of the time around 60 minutes, where we really discussed our new things that we created. Like developers were showing what they were coding, designers in Figma, and everybody, and then we collaborated. Designer and developer were, for example, talking about the same component. It was progressing in parallel. And this was really my aha moment. This was the light at the end of the tunnel, working collaboratively with coders and designers. If you really build, test, and finishing one scope together, this is magical. Programmers don't need to wait. Programmers can test out what components to reuse. The designer can start with a little bit of the higher level with the bigger picture. And then it just comes together like in the middle. this is really this was really magical for me. I have not seen something for an existing team. Just the reason that we're all together on the same scope for this time box was automatically causing a good collaboration mode. I would also say you need at least one person with experience or motivation to prevent the Scrum Fall over planning. But also calling to discipline to work one slice at a time. You really need to, some part of the team, some individuals wanting to plan the whole project up front when you have at the start of the cycle. So they wanted to identify all the epics, and they wanted to have dependencies, what building first and then later. But this is too much of over planning. While if you don't have the discipline to work at one thing at a time, or at least start with one slice at a time, then you also end up on a place that's not so good. Yeah, and I really recommend that at least half of the people actually have read the book. I think that's enough if the rest is committed to try it out. So everybody saw a basic presentation from me before we started at all. And then the people inside of the cycle, they decided, some of them decided to read the book. Some of them were motivated to try it out a little bit more than the others. And I think it was roughly 50%, and it was okay. Because yeah, it's really hard to explain how scopes are forming on its own when you just have never experienced it. And this is why some people tend to overplan it maybe at the beginning, but then you end up with some, yeah, with smaller cycles, with smaller Scrum Fall waterfalls inside of the cycle. And as I said, the main learning is really that when the shape changes during the cycle, then you end up working everywhere at the same time. We started to identify, so we started unscoped, like for the first couple of days, just discovering scopes. UX was writing user stories, designer was starting with navigation, like high level, developers were starting bottom up. So at the beginning, all good. Then we identified our first scope and the second scope and so on. Then we showed it to the customer, and then yeah, we decided to change our plan a little bit, as I said. So, but if you work like this, you end up at the end polishing and fixing and testing everything at the same time everywhere. I think if our pitch would have been on a better altitude, then it would have been easier to just work one scope at a time, check it, and really finishing it together. So this really goes hand in hand for me. You need the pitch level to actually work good inside of the cycle. So this is why the pitch was so crucial for me, and why I shared a lot of our what we did wrong and why it was wrong for us. So because we started, changed a little bit our course, and then yeah, we were changing things we're building new things, and then everybody's working on everything at the end. Like in the last week, we were just polishing everything, and I imagine this could be a better experience if the pitch would have been on the right level. And maybe the situation with the inside-outside cycle collaboration. So the builders form what I would call a temporary squad, if you talk with the Spotify model language. So they are their own team for 6 weeks, but they are still in contact with their peers from their profession. So they have a regular exchange, the UX designers with the other UX designers, UI with UI, to just keep the big picture. they had an experience designed daily. I think it was once a week or twice a week. I don't know. It was not daily, but they called it like this. But this is where they did, all 4 designers, they did the big picture decisions together like they did before, but not in a waterfall way, but just ad hoc when it's necessary. And all the developers together, they had their developers huddle where we showed what we were doing to the other developers. So we had this new part of the code. We were using feature guards like this. This is the architecture here. We're refactoring this a lot. You don't touch this other part. It will be refactored later. So this was where our communication were happening. Yeah, infrastructure, I already said it. We had continuous integration with feature flags. And this is really the foundation for engineering to work on different features in parallel. We had no larger issues. We had just feature guards that were enabling a feature for a certain user set with a certain roles configuration while we were shipping the whole thing to production, and other customers did not see it. And as I said, the first cycle we developed is a feature branch. This also works, but I would not recommend it. It was okay for this solution because we were not sure, will this be forever on the code base? Will it be its own product in the future? Because it was a large separated feature. So in those cases, feature branch could work. But in most cases where you really develop something that is very close to the rest of the product, feature guards are, in my experience, the way to go. And by the way, last thing I want to mention here, that the communication for the half of the Scrum team that was not doing shape up was also much more efficient, because all the meetings, the refinements, the plannings, the grooming sessions, and so on, you had just half of the people attending it, and thus a lot less communication happening. And for them also, communication were just happening for the people relevant to solve it then afterwards. Yeah, it's because communication scales exponentially. As you might know, you might already saw a graph like this. Yes, this was the last part, the part to the questions.
Cool. Let's start with the questions. David here.
Thank you. Yeah, so the pitch, yeah, definitely would be sort of that kernel, that starting point. So other than that, is there anything else that you would recommend, or something that you would not recommend if you and the team, I'm going to assume, are going to try and replicate shape up for the next project? If there's anything that you would do differently.
As actually right now, I think next week we have a larger meeting talking about the future process of the team, and I would, so we did an experiment, and until we talk about the results of the experience, nobody wanted to change something on the process. So we were continue doing Scrum. We were continuing with the, I would call it bloated grooming and refinement sessions. So while everybody all the time is wishing that we can continue doing shape up. So we had in our regular Scrum retros, we had feedback like, oh, I wish I can just work in shape up mode. I was disturbed so many times during this complex thing. So I would recommend maybe having a more, maybe organize the rest of the, having the decision closer to the experiments. Yeah, this is what I wanted to say, because now we had I think immediately after the end of the experiment, the second half of the people have experienced it. We should have made the decision And instead, we've waited now 3 weeks because we have a workshop in person upcoming and everybody is operating in the old mode, but it's almost clear that nobody wants to continue in the old mode. So this is something I would recommend. And yeah, maybe I could also recommend having a little bit more exchange before. So really, and I think this will coming from Ryan as well, sawing more real pictures from others and in the real world, having maybe a little bit more training and guidance on this side. So it's yeah, most of the things I do not really regret. It's just things that could have been better, a little bit more education upfront, but we tried it quick and dirty with less preparation. It also works that way.
Okay, thank you.
Following up to that question, you posted or you showed things, quotes from the team that they did like, things they like and things they experience and the feeling with ShapeUp. Did someone mention some things they didn't like or things that they don't?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I did not talk about this, but especially it was the testing process. So our Scrum board had a lot of columns, and UX and UI designers in Scrum were really thoroughly testing the tickets. So first developers were testing the tickets on staging, then UX were testing the user experience, UI designer was testing the interface, every pixel counts, every font size. So we had a very long testing process, and then at the end, the PO decides if something needs to be fixed or if it's okay like it is. And this process we did not do in ShapeUp, and this is feedback from the team. They had wished for a more formal testing process. I'm not sure how we address this. This is also something that I'm hoping will be relieved with a pitch on the right level and working on smaller scopes at the same time. So if you're not jump that much, I think you have less frequent bugs and you have more time to test and finish one scope at a time. But this was really the main downside, I think. Other maybe a little bit of smaller point was that the dailies, what we decided in the dailies was often not implemented one-to-one because we had not like we had no Scrum Master like person that takes care for noting that everything is noted down. So some of the people in the team, they just wrote down their own notes on Post-its. Others were doing it in Jira, and so we had no real alignment. What are we working on next? It was very up to the individual. At the end, it worked, but we had sometimes some clashes where somebody was expecting something that's not there, or we mentioned it 3 times and it's not implemented. So we had some minor incidents. It was not a huge thing. At the end, it worked out, but this is something that I think this will improve as the longer people work autonomously on their own. But it's just maybe a small itch to scratch here.
Okay, got it. Cool. I have another question here. Is regarding the dev huddle. You said the communication inside out, outside the cycle. Did you have any formal way of doing pull requests or reviewing the development?
Yes,
the code,
sure.
Developers?
Yeah,
How
we
did it
had
work?
a good question. I did not touch on this. Before we did merge requests. We have GitLab, and GitLab it's merge request, not pull request. And then somebody else reviews it, then it's merged in. And then it's deployed to staging automatically if it's in master. And it works the same in the Scrum part and in the Shape Up part alike. So everything that is developed will be reviewed from the other developer, because we had 2 developers in each part of the team. So we did not shortcut on this, because this would compromise code quality, and this is nothing that somebody wants.
Okay, the squad had 2 developers inside working.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
So with 2 developers, you can check it. In the Scrum, the merge requests were very strictly tied to a ticket. We were a little bit looser in Shape Up, and this is something the developers really appreciated, that you not need to do 1 merge request for 1 ticket, that you can split up a ticket on multiple smaller ones, or also fix some minor tickets in 1 larger merge request. So this is having this a little bit more loose was actually very enjoyed from the developers, but nothing was merged in without review.
Perfect. And the UI designer also checking with made reviews with other UIs, the person from the outside team, the outside squad, sorry.
Yeah, they were in some sparring, because sometimes the one designer does not know how it's solved on the other part of the application. So they had their meetings to discuss it with them.
David, you have a question, right?
Yes, I think one of the things you mentioned was that having Shape Up and having this isolated team also reduced the communication overhead for the team that remained in Scrum, right? I mean, being kind of a devil's advocate, and in that case, devil being Scrum, wouldn't it then make sense to cut it into kind of 2 squads, 2 Scrum tracks, and also have similar gains?
Yes, this is a good question. I asked this question myself or also. I think the 6 weeks from Shape Up are better suited to do this, and I think the collaboration is just easier if you don't have to force everything into tickets. Yeah, these are the main reasons, I think. But this is a lot. This is, I think, the most counter argument I experienced in the last months where I was involved with this method. That everybody is saying, if you just do Scrum right, then it will work. But it's actually very hard to implement Scrum right and do it for everybody right. And I have the opinion that Shape Up, if you adapt it to your case, if you change it, if you adapt it, it gets better. But Scrum the situation got worse if you change it to something. So it's a very strict framework if you really want to have all of the upsides, in my opinion. Whereas Shape Up really is more flexible if you have, because it just changes this paradigm, like when and who to shape, and also that you have this fixed time variable scope mindset, and this 2 together really changes everything.
Yeah,
Scrum, even in a smaller team, you still would facing the situations where you have your fixed scope, and then at the end you end up with a variable time because you just estimate what was built, and then you also need to do trade-offs later on that may be on the wrong side of the product.
Yeah, makes sense.
Any question from the participants? Yeah, here we have one.
Hello. Basically, I'm just asking if we will have to fight against this Parkinson's law that the work tends to fill all the time that you give to a certain task.
Yeah, I know this law, but actually I think you are profiting from this law if you work like this, because you really also the work ends earlier if you just give it this time. And in my experience, our features, they started larger during the shaping, and then we really needed to cut it down to the most important parts that could fit into 6 weeks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks. Good, sir. Any other question? I think we are kind of on time, right? Okay.
Yeah, that is true. Is there a way people could reach you? Klaus, do you want to kind of share ways to contact you maybe?
Oh, yeah, sure. One moment. So, yeah, basically, this is my address, my impressum. This is my blog, vo1.io. Please drop me a line at my email if you want to have sparring with me, if you want to have tell me a little bit about your team. I'm also sharing more, I'm willing to share more things about the team or teams that I'm working with. So I'm open for everything. Please drop me a line.
Yeah,
Awesome.
nice domain name. I thought it was when I write to your site, I thought it was like a big hacker site.
No, this is my approach, my mindset. Always build the next version 01 and don't think in too large steps. Just build something and then see how does it work. And I have this name and this address for quite a long time because it's just my personal manifesto. It's just build the first version 01, and yeah, ShapeUp fits very good to this mindset.
Idea. Well, Klaus, thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you very much everyone who attended to today. We will, of course, share this on the YouTube channel. The recording will be shared with you by email. Also, we will share the Google form. Also, if you want to. If you are working with ShapeUp already and you want to share your experience with us, it would be cool to hear you and just gather and talk about it. So, anything you want to say, David?
No, I think that sums it up perfectly. Thanks, Johnny, and thank you, Klaus. Really.
Welcome. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Okay.
Awesome.
I'll stop the recording now.